Due Process, honored for 3 consecutive years with the Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Outstanding Talk Program Series.
Anywhere that crown is, we need to know.
Patterson police insist there are gangs in their schools, and they want high school teachers to help them find out how and why and who. Should teachers be the eyes and ears of police? On this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
It's not the Sharks and the Jets anymore. Gang activity can be criminal and deadly. But how close is it to home? Have our high schools become home to Crips and Bloods? I'm Raymond Brown, and on this edition of Due Process, should law enforcement go inside our schools to detect gangs and control them? Should teachers and principals be a part of that process? We'll put those questions to a veteran policeman who's dealt with gangs, a civil rights attorney, and an expert on school violence. But first, here's Sandy King with one town's attempt at an answer. Sandy?
Raymond, we took our cameras to Patterson, where police are sounding the alarm and asking the schools to join their fight. Now, Patterson isn't the only place with new anti-gang initiatives financed with state and federal funds. But it is the place that's been first to go public with a policy based on the firm belief that the gangs are there and have to be dealt with, even if that means new partnerships with schools.
I need to make sure that Latin King symbol, especially that crown, right, if that's in the bathroom, if that's on people's desks and things like that, we need to know every time something like that crops up, especially the crown, especially the crown.
And the crown, this Patterson detective claims, means the Latin Kings have left their mark.
We're trying to recruit inside this building. If you got crowns inside of the school, then you know that the Kings are there.
It's not really like, Bloods and Crips. It's most likely people have their own street and they represent their street.
Yes.
That's about it.
The East Side got violent activities going on.
Don't lie,
There's a lot of blocks.
There's wannabe gangsters, but there's not gangs.
It ain't no real gang.
Ain't no real gangs. They want to be gangbangers.
But as of Monday, there'll be a police officer up here that's trained to read graffiti, and he'll be able to identify stuff too, but you need to take him in and about the building, right, and anywhere that crown is, we need to know.
So the Patterson Gang Squad plans to put cops in the schools, and they don't intend to stop with that.
The magic word of the day is collaborate.
And that's had groups like this one, social workers, principals, teachers, lining up to take part in sessions like this.
And what I want to try to do is for you to realize that law enforcement, is not the enemy.
So police are looking for friends among the faculty, but to what end?
Look for the signs. It could be a jacket, it could be a parade, it could be a cover of a magazine. Gang symbols are everywhere.
We really didn't go in and tell the teachers you're going to act as our deputies, but we need their eyes, we need their ears.
Our staff members are there to teach kids. And if I have every characteristic of a gang member, but I'm in class and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and I'm not disrupting the class, why would I report you?
To ask them to then be police when they do not have training in that area, do not have expertise, and do not want to work from profiles about what a gang member is or isn't, it's just not a good idea.
Nonetheless, the alarm is being sounded that high schools just may be infected by gangs, and at least some school personnel are listening.
I think it's very important for our staff and all the people who are working with the children to be aware of what's going on, because the epidemic can easily possibly turn out to what's going on out in Los Angeles.
Children at a very young age are showing hand signs. We could be alert to that in our school and redirect our children into other activities.
That's what Paterson police want to hear, and it's all a part of their new gang strategy.
We have been told that the Bloods, this is a lot of blood action up in this area. This other graffiti is tagging, it's graffiti that it shouldn't be here, but it's not as much of a concern as the Crown itself, because the Crown means one thing, and that's the Kings are here.
But here at Paterson's Eastside High, there's been no gang-related arrest, and the principal says, with good reason.
We don't really have, per se, a gang problem within our particular school. At this particular time, we have not had any type of a problem with any organized gang activity.
The Eastside principal said there wasn't any gang. Well, if you're not educated to the point of gangs, then you don't know what a gang is. This is why we have had several seminars and several sessions with the teachers to tell them that there are gangs in your building.
These are some of their identifiers: clothing, accessories, jewelry, hand signs, gang alphabets, graffiti, tattoos on the arms and marks. Specific 252 is a sex, money, and murder set of the Bloods, becoming very popular up in our region.
What's the deal with the beads?
Well, if they're wearing the beads, that's part of their identification too. Okay, because that there exists. If kids are wearing beads all over town,
Right, because they have a big thing about us. Don't touch the beads. If you touch my beads.
Yeah, because it's disrespecting them when you take the beads. But see, the beads are not true.
We do see signs of kids in the buildings wearing certain bandanas and having certain, it's like the symbols he was talking about. We do see that.
That kids are marking the bathroom walls up. Kids are doodling on their books and making signs, and they see the kids out in the play yards throwing gang signs. They have to let us know this.
We want the teachers to be aware of what's around them. We don't want teachers to be police officers. The only way that that schools can be safe and that people can be safe is with education. That's why we took education to the teachers.
Out here, it's all the time.
Let the principal know that we would definitely be here on Monday, you know, and probably be 2 police officers stationed here for the remainder of the school year. And like I said before, anywhere that Crown is, make sure you point it out to them. They need to know.
Officers stationed within a school asking teachers and principals to be their gang-fighting partners? Does keeping kids safe mean crossing the line that divides education and enforcement? Proponents say the situation is that serious. But when we asked the cop who's in charge of Paterson's school gang initiative if he could show us one case of one arrest of one high school kid for what was clearly gang activity, Raymond, he could not show us one.
Question arises then, what is driving this trend to put teacher and cop in what some may see as a kind of unholy alliance? We'll ask a seasoned police officer from Camden City, a civil liberties lawyer, as well as a psychiatrist who studies adolescence and violence when we come back. So stay with us.
Point out? Yeah. Definitely, if it's going to make our streets safer, I think they should, if they have the opportunity, if they know of any gang members.
They should definitely try to go for the main criminal element, because, you know, you got these wannabe Crips and Bloods, you know, because their cousin's a Crip, and so, oh, let me go get a red hanky and let me walk around with it.
I don't know, per se, if they should be cops now, but I think that definitely they should enforce some type of rules and try to find out if there's people who are going to threaten the safety of the students.
This will put students on individual lookout and teachers also.
I think it's the teacher's responsibility to say something.
They should try and help. Kids want to learn, not be, you know, illusioned by being in a gang. It's a cool thing.
Our own informal, unscientific survey showed greater concern about the threat of gangs than the threat of any methods to detect them. We'll ask Camden Police Captain Raymond Massey if that just makes sense. We'll ask civil liberties lawyer Leon Grauer why he sees cause for alarm. And we'll turn to psychiatrist pediatrician Robert Johnson in Newark for some insight into what draws kids into violence and gangs. Thank you all. Captain Massey, let me start with you. You've been in law enforcement 27 years, much of that time focused on youth and gang-related activity. Is it really necessary for police to set up this kind of collaborative relationship with teachers in terms of identifying what might not be criminal activity yet, but the signs of possible gang allegiance or membership?
I think so. If we want to interest ourselves in intervention and trying to make a difference prior to the criminal activity, prior to young people being incarcerated, then I think teachers and police officers have to get together. They have to communicate, and they have to let each other know what's going on. But if you look at it as if police are asking educators to become informants, then I think that's the wrong view of it.
But isn't that really what it is? I mean, aren't we really asking them to give information before a crime is committed about what they suspect kids may be doing, exactly as we would deal with informants, except we're not giving them any reward?
Well, I can only speak for Camden, and how we do this in Camden is this. We're concerned about these young people. We're concerned about helping them prior to a problem. That's intervention. And when the police join with educators and discuss a youth and the problems that youth may have.
But it starts with identifying on the basis of less than criminal conduct. Kids who are potential risks. And doesn't that raise some question about what role we're asking teachers to play in the process?
Well, it asks the question on what role you expect the police to play. If you see the police officers only as the individual who comes in and locks them up, well then yeah. But if you see police officers as part of the community, like you see teachers as part of the community that are together addressing a problem in the community, we're trying to help someone. And if you're trying to help someone, how can you say that's wrong?
Okay, well, we'll come back and duke some more with you. But first, let me turn to my friend Leon Grauer and say, Leon, you may want to write off Captain Massey as just a fanatical police officer, but all the folks in our little survey seem to feel they're not concerned about the method. They want to deal with this issue of identifying early kids who may be at risk for involvement in gang activity. What's wrong with it?
Well, I think there's a couple of things wrong with it. This new hysteria of gang violence and gang formation in and out of schools is what I call the war on drugs for the new millennium. It is a hysteria. It is the new theme of law enforcement, and it's pumped up by lots of dollars. And it's also followed by what we've seen with the so-called war on drugs, that we have to go after these people at all costs, and it becomes an avenue of infringing upon civil liberties, not just of the small group that's originally intended to be the target, but of the larger society.
Are you saying that there is no underlying concern we should have with gang activity, or are you saying that this proposal doesn't make sense? Which is the position that's closest to yours?
Well, I think that we should be concerned with any criminal activity. The problem is that what is going on is that we are terming, or law enforcement is categorizing gang activity as something dangerous and we have to all be on the lookout for. Well, how do we define a gang? Is a gang something like the Little Rascals, our gang, Spanky, Buckwheat, and Alfalfa? Is it the 4 kids from South Park? Is it a group of kids from, say, Custer Avenue in Newark, where I grew up, who stick together?
Let me pick up on that question.
Sure.
Dr. Johnson, you have a long-time reputation as working very effectively with kids who are troubled. Why do young people feel a need for gang affiliation or connection to a gang?
Well, Raymond, let me get to that question in a moment. I think I first want to question the issue of whether or not this is an intervention. Bringing police and teachers together identifies young people after they have already decided to become members of gangs. That's not an intervention. That's not a prevention. That is going after the problem after it's occurred. If we truly want to intervene, we have to get to the point you just asked me. That is the reason why young people get involved in gangs. Now, and I work with young people who are involved in violent activities or in gangs shows that young people decide to affiliate with some group because there's nothing else around to do, or they feel something in common with those individuals. If we look at the places where gangs are most likely to occur, we find communities that have separated themselves away from young people. Here in Newark and Princeton, Patterson, in Camden, these are all very devastated inner-city communities where there's nothing for young people to do. If you look at the investment that schools put in extracurricular activities for young people, you find places like Newark where there's no music course or curriculum in schools. And so if we take away everything from our youth, youth will go to other things we may not want them to be involved with.
At what age would you begin to focus then on providing alternatives?
Well, my feeling is that everything starts in the home. So the alternatives start at birth. And the center for all these activities have to be involved in families. Once young people get outside of the family and get involved in activities in communities, then you begin to start those activities there. That's 4 or 5 years of age. But communities have to turn around and say, we value our young people. We want to provide community centers for them. We want to provide extracurricular activities. The only intervention we are offering for our children is more police enforcement in schools. That doesn't prevent gangs. It detects gangs once they're there, and it may decrease gang violence to some extent. But the other thing is that most violence in school isn't related to gangs at all, and most violence among youth isn't in schools. So it doesn't really solve the problem. It is a cosmetic approach that can make us feel good because we have metal detectors there or policemen walking the hall, but the problem will still remain.
Captain Massey, it sounds as though Dr. Johnson is suggesting that by the time you get to collaborating with teachers, it's too late to do anything but traditional law enforcement functions. That seems to me to undermine the idea that you can work in a way that's cooperative and doesn't undermine the teacher's job as a person who teaches kids and maybe even as a confidant to them.
I agree with Dr. Johnson, but in terms of what's too late, I have books on gangs and delinquent behavior that go back to the 1930s. They had a problem then with delinquent behavior in gangs. I realize, as do many other police officers, that gangs are a symptom of the problem, but they are also indicators. They're signs. They give us a direction.
Have your experiences in Camden over the last several years shown you that much of the crime that you have to deal with in Camden comes from or is connected to gang activity?
It comes from or is connected to groups of people that work together in an organization for criminal profit.
Do you consider them gangs from the point of view of either intelligence?
If there's a criminal element to it, yes, I do. In fact, the state of New Jersey has defined gangs for us.
How does the state define gangs?
They define it as having a criminal element, a youth gang. In fact, it was done by the Attorney General's office in the mid-'80s, where there's groups of individuals to come together for common purposes, and I'm not quoting it verbatim, but criminal element is definitely a part of the definition.
Now, Leon, it seems to me that this has got to be your territory. As a civil liberties lawyer, and we also know that you have a lot of criminal justice experience, you're concerned about free association. How does the concept of gang fit into that? I mean, just because we dress alike as adolescents or because we wear the same colors, should that deprive us of the same access to teachers as purely pedagogical persons as anybody else?
Well, it shouldn't. And I think there's a Supreme Court decision from 1999 that is spoken of frequently in the legal community, City of Chicago versus Morales. And one of the many reasons the court struck down a Chicago anti-gang loitering statute was because it did just that. It penalized people because of association. And the association was determined by whatever an individual officer effectively determined it was, that we're wearing similar clothing, that we have a particular tattoo, and that's just too much discretion in an individual officer to determine who should and shouldn't be arrested. The more serious question, I think, is twofold. One is, do we want teachers acting as branches of our police department? We all know that young people make mistakes, young people experiment. Do we want our children subjected to police action, police interrogation, being pulled out of classrooms, put up against the wall after school because of a tattoo they wear, because of a bandana, or something that some adult sees as gang activity?
You prompted a question that I want to pose to Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, you heard one of the citizens of the state of New Jersey talking about gang wannabes. What about kids who are not gang members, even by Captain Massey's definition, but who might imitate clothing or other gang symbols because they think it's cool? Should we be concerned about that? Should we be focused on that? And if so, how should we address it?
Well, Raymond, you know, sociologically, gangs are groups of individuals who want to affiliate with each other, look like each other, talk like each other, dress like each other, have been around almost since the beginning of time. I guess Cain and Abel formed the first gangs, and they were involved in a lot of violent behavior. But that's not the problem. The problem is that that we have gotten to a point in our society where the only thing we want to do is to punish young people for affiliating with each other if they're involved in criminal behavior. And we haven't asked ourselves, why do they choose to be involved in these criminal behaviors? Young people have become involved with looking like members of gangs because it's a popular thing to do. That doesn't mean that they're gang members. And I think we make a big mistake if our only answer for our children is law enforcement. That can't be the only answer for our children. We need to provide other things for them. And I go back to the old statement again. We need to have communities that love their children. And communities and schools show that they love their children by the investment that they make in their children. And if the only investment is a punitive one, if the only investment, the largest expenditure in Essex County for youth is a new Essex County jail, then that's a very bad message for our children.
Are you troubled by the prospect of teachers watching kids from this more punitive perspective? Or
well, not from a medical point of view. I'm very troubled from the point of view of a citizen of the state. I think teachers need to teach. And in many of our big cities, they aren't doing that very well. They are not trained law enforcement people. They're not trained to work with the police. If there needs to be some type of law enforcement in the schools, then let's spend the money to do that. But let's give teachers the opportunity to do what we hire teachers to do, and that is teach our children.
Captain Massey, let me give you a tough hypothetical. Let's take the wannabe case. Let's take a kid who has no more intention of committing a crime than Leon Grauer. And yet this is a kid who thinks it's cool or likes the colors of a gang. I mean, he understands what it means, but has no intention to engage in improper conduct. The teacher sees it because the teacher's been briefed by local police or the county prosecutor and brings it to your attention or the attention of other law enforcement. Isn't this kind of heavy-handed for the kid to now be facing a police officer, which could be an intimidating experience, on the basis of conduct that's imitative but pretty innocent?
Well, first of all, I believe that educators should be educated in any area that they choose to. And if I can help them with that by giving them a perspective from a law enforcement point of view, I'd be happy to do that at any time. I also disagree that we want to go into schools and do searches or throw people up against the wall. Again, we're going back to a mentality that police officers are in there to lock people up. Now, we have family therapists in our juvenile division. When young people come into our juvenile division, they get to sit and talk to a family therapist. So the wannabe shows up. This kid is having a little problem. Well, we would like to know, well, what is it that he's looking for? What's the reason for the problem? What are the root causes of the behavior? I don't believe the police are necessarily qualified to do that. So we have family therapists, master's level family therapists in the juvenile division that will sit and talk and spend some time with these kids, and we have follow-up programs that these kids can get involved with.
But the
That's
teacher
all under the umbrella of law enforcement. It has nothing to do with
But there's
throwing kids
also a
against the wall.
counseling service available in most educational systems.
Sure.
Why are the teachers talking to police based on their identification? Because I think that's the question. Because you do have a law enforcement function. Well, you may not be heavy-handed or brutal. I mean, that's maybe a stereotype. But you certainly have a function that tends to be more punitive and tends to be oriented towards prevention of crime or stopping it as it begins to evolve. Why not have them go to guidance counselors that are affiliated with the school who have nothing to do with the school?
Well, they can do that as well.
But in this context, we're talking about indicators that the police have seen as precursors to criminal conduct. And the question is whether this isn't something that can create more problems than it can solve.
Well, I think that it's not going to create more problems. Wherever there's a cooperation, I think that a lot of the problems that we've had so far is because of formerly a lack of cooperation between the Board of Education and law enforcement. That's all been changed by the state with a memorandum of agreement between educators and law enforcement officials. We can talk to each other now. We can give them information.
Yeah, Captain Massey seems a perfectly reasonable guy. He just wants to sit down and talk, perhaps, to kids or have them referred to somebody in the youth division. Why are you concerned about police involvement in this level?
Well, on the surface, that seems fine, Raymond, but what's going on in reality is that the police are effectively creating dossiers on young people. Your child, 11, 12, 13 years old. There are youth files that some police departments are maintaining now on your children. And that can be because they've actually been involved in a crime or because someone, a teacher, a counselor, a principal, or police officer, chooses to stereotype their clothing, their dress, their behavior. You know, I remember when I was growing up, what is now defined as gang activity, the Nation of Islam, back then called more popularly the Black Muslims, in Newark schools would have been classified as a gang.
As we wind down, Leon, let me just ask Dr. Johnson whether you see any prospect of a more creative response to this issue than the one that's now being discussed.
There are some discussions about more creative aspects, and that occurs when whole communities come together. You know, families have been left out of this discussion, and young people are creatures of their families, and that's where the focus needs to be. The other thing is that it's not just an individual response to an individual youngster. We need to have those as well, but it's a response to a population of young people, and we realize that the whole community of young people need to be addressed, not just the individual who may be dressing like a gang member or may even be in a gang. Then we'll begin to get some movement.
I hate to ask yes or no questions, but we're running out of time. Likelihood that we're going to have an improvement in the gang situation, or is it going to continue to deteriorate as it seems to be now?
Oh, gangs have been around for a very long time. You pointed out the Jets,
agree or
and it's been around. It'll always be around.
Better or worse?
I believe that the gangs will always exist. What I'm hoping is that the criminal behavior will be done away with.
Leon, we have to ask you the next time, but I'm glad each of you has been with us, and we're going to ask you to join us again as we continue to focus on this and other related issues. But for today, that's it for this edition of Due Process. You'll want to join us next week for what we do best, legal and social issues, the ones you won't see elsewhere on TV, examined in a balanced, thorough way. Till next time, for Sandy King and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Every time something like that crops up,
I can tell you that's in the building.
Yeah, right.
Cafeterias and then the bathrooms in the basement.
Right. If it's in the bathroom, if it's in the basements, then we need to know. Every time that crops up, we need to see that. We need to know that that's there, especially the crime. Especially the crime. Now, I know, as you said before, I know the Latin Kings do. This is their area. This is where they be at, and the Bloods do stay on the other side. But in particular, like I said, when the crowns are cropping up, that's something that we need to be concerned about, and the administrator needs to be concerned about. But as of Monday, there'll be a police officer up here that's trained to read graffiti, and he'll be able to identify stuff too. But you need to take him in and about the building, and anywhere that crown is, we need to know.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,